Finish. Button.
Button. Possible. Button. Possible text. Press. Possible text. Press. Button. 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 Possible text. Press. Button. Possible text. Press. Possibly. Setting. Button. Button. Possibly. Button. Possible text. Press. Possible text. Press. Button. Button. 7 button. 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 Possible text. Press. Button. Possibly. Setting. Button. Button. Possibly. Set. Button. Button. Possibly. Settings. Button. Possible text. Let's go. Possible text. Possible text. Press.
Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen.
Button. Button. Possibly. Button. Button. Possibly. Settings. Button. Button. Button.
والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم وعلى آله وصحبه تسليما كثيرا ما بعد. I hope that the voice is okay. I don't have my mic like I normally have. There's some problems with the mic tonight. Allah musta'an. I'll try to raise my voice so that inshallah ta'ala the sound is clear. Tonight is the 6th class in the issue of social issues. The 6th class in the issue of social issues. And tonight, the voice of oppression, we want to talk about something that's it's related to not just the African American community, but the Muslim community. And this talk kind of stemmed from a conversation that I was having with one of my dear brothers that we go back to the 90s. We were in the same community in the state of New Jersey. And he made a post. He was talking about how the community was divided and how the resources were taken, and it was in light of what we understand to be the African American Salafi community. And some of the people went back and forth a little bit on the post and so forth. And so this we talked about, me and that dear brother, afterwards, and a lot of points came up that's kind of relevant to the state of affairs as we speak. So inshallah tabaraka wa ta'ala, we're going to talk about this topic in light of not just African American community, but the Muslim community as it relates to the issue of oppression. What time I have?
7:41.
Okay, tell you. I took the topic desecration of a people, race, and community. That's the first part of the subject matter. Desecration of a people, a race, and a community. And if you look up the word desecration, it has to do with destroying something that's sacred. Destroying something that's sacred, or something that's tied to God, or something that's tied to a people's spirituality. And we said a race, because this is talking about the African American race, if you will, and a people, because it also includes, a particular group of people, and then you talk about community. And the way that they do this destroying, it's in a subtle way that you don't understand, you don't know that it's taking place, and by the time the damage is done, it's too late. By the time the damage is done, it's too late. So if we go back, desecration of a people, a race, and a community. How? Through economics. That's the first way. Through economics. By cutting ties or making a people disconnected, isolated. By that which is sectarianism, dividing the people into groups or sects. And it also makes instability and disunity. And then all of that in a nutshell is envy in the black community amongst the Muslims. And this is the topic in a general sense tonight. So if we go back, we said desecration. And this destruction, if we talk about in the African American community in general, then we see, like, if you go back to the issue of after slavery, when the people were supposed to be free from slavery, then the way that they desecrated the people and that race and the community was by different levels of modern day slavery. And we don't have enough time to go into the issue of the sharecropping, which was a form of slavery after they were free and they were left to fend independently with no resources. Then the Jim Crow era, where they basically set a policy and a social reform of labeling further the African American as a criminal and illegitimately placing him in prison, and each prison or each community or each town or village, they would exchange the prisoner to one another to do work. And you kind of see that when you talk about, you see the guys out doing work on the highway, work on the roads. They call it, community service. So they're working, and they're inmates. They're wardens of the state. But you see them doing different jobs, and that's on the outside, let alone the work that they do on the inside for Fortune 500 companies, multi-billion-dollar companies doing the work for $1.50, $2, an hour, and that work is used, from a state as well as a federal level. So all of these things we could talk about in the black community, how they desecrated the people. And then when you talk about the civil rights, which started before Martin Luther King, but the impact and the strong changes that also included the likes of the Black Panther movement and the other different movements, then you found the desecration of a people through all type of economic ways of what we would consider disadvantages. And the issue of the desecration as it relates to a people, the different systematic things that they put in place to keep the people, the minorities, the blacks, from elevating themselves as a people. And this doesn't take away from people that in different areas may have became what we would call prosperous, or as we if you like, they made it. We're saying as a whole, the system was put in place to keep the people down, to keep the people disunited, to make the people have no economic strength, and to make disunity and that which would ultimately be the hatred between one another from the inside. And so if we fast forward, we talk about like the era of Malcolm X and Hajj Malik Shabazz, we can see how they desecrated the black community. They desecrated, they destroyed what was sacred to those people on an economic level, as it relates to, how they moved and controlled their money, and there's no doubt, no mistake, the FBI, CIA, they instigated and they made that which was from the inside the issue of disunity and those things that led to the dismantling of not only that community but a long-lasting desecration, as it relates to a people and a race. If we fast forward, as we're talking about now on a larger scale with the Muslims, because this is an issue that the Muslims have to understand. And we understand that in the 90s, as we were part of the community and part of the success in the city of East Orange, New Jersey, this is relevant when we talk about how the government, how they use these tools to desecrate a community, a race, and a people. I remember when they talk about the World War I, and they talk about how the Germans, the French, and they talk about, the alliances between Germany and the Turkish, which we know during that time, the late 1800s, this was what we would call the Ottoman Empire, from the word Uthman. So they changed Uthman to Ottoman, but really it was the Uthmani, from the rule of the Uthmani Empire. And this was known politically as the last Khalifa, the last Khilafah, the last general rule of the Muslims together as a single body. And during that time, the people were about to begin what would be considered World War I. And during that time, you had on the other side Great Britain, you had France, you had some of the Muslims from amongst the Arabs that they played on both sides. They had some that were with the British because the British occupied Egypt, saying that we're protecting you, while Egypt was still under the rule of the Ottoman Empire because they were Muslim. And then you had some loyalty from those Muslims in Egypt to the Ottoman Empire, respecting the Khalifa in Turkey, that didn't want to go against them. So when the French and the British tried to manipulate them to go against the Muslim brothers, then they said, no, we can't do that. And at that same time, the Ottoman Empire, which was the rule of the Muslims in general, they were losing their grip because they were fighting with people in the Baltic states, which is the Soviet Union. They were losing, grip in that regard. And then you still had them controlling Algeria, which is Jazair, Tunis, which is Tunisia, and you had then Libya, which is the land that we know to be Gaddafi. And then you still had all of what they call Mesopotamia. What they call that today? Iraq, like Syria. This, Jordan, Syria, like this, huh?
East Syria.
East Syria, yeah. Circular Haven, the Red Sea, all of that, that included, subhanallah, Yemen, Saudi Arabia, all of that, the Muslims had under one rule. So what they did was, Wallah Musta'an, during the rule of Abdul Hamid II, he was the Sultan, the leader, the Khalifa at that time. they went and they told many of the Arabs who were unified. Even when you talk about unification of Arabs, you had Jews, Christians, and Muslims, and they living together. And they weren't trying to become independent from the Turks, but because of the infighting that was going on already amongst the Turks, the Ottoman Empire, you had a young group that wanted to, bring some new liberation. So that was instability from the inside. And then the Turks, they admired the Germans because the Germans seemed to have it all together when you talk about economics and structure and being together. And not only the Turks admired them, which they're part of the European nation, just like the Germans, then you had the Arabs, on the other hand, primarily, they were admiring the Germans too, because the Germans seem to have had it together, again, economically and strategically and so on. So they created this wedge between the Muslims where they promised certain countries, if you will, such as Egypt. If you go against the Khalifa, we'll give you this. And they said the same thing to the soldiers from Iraq, we'll give you that. And they said, no, we're not going to go that far against the Khalifa, But the Arabs, they wanted independence. And part of it was because they were being, unfortunately, they were being oppressed. Even though we were still talking about one Muslim community, it became an issue of making sure that nobody wants to go against us from the inside as well as the outside. And it was known that the Arabs wanted their own independence. They wanted their own, what you would call liberation. And when you say Arabs here, now we're talking about mainly Saudi Arabia. While they considered Egypt to be Arabs, they considered Syrians to be Arabs, but here we're talking about primarily the Arabs from the Arabian Peninsula. And if you go back, you'll see that Germany was trying to beat Britain to who could get the area that the Turks were in first back then, because they wanted to get the oil that was not only in that region, but they wanted to make sure that they get that oil that was going through Iraq way back then. And so what happened was those people that wanted a change, and that included the new people in the Turkish Empire, they were basically sold on the issue that if you help us from the inside, then we'll give you what you want. So on that tip, you had that happening in Turkey, while they went on the other hand to the Arabs of Saudi Arabia, and they went to the King Hussein. They called him during that time it was Sharif Hussein, and Sharif comes from the word Sharaf, meaning he's of a noble status, and that's because this Sharif Hussein, he's actually from a tree of the Prophet ﷺ. He's from the Bani Hashim, so they call them today Hashemites, and that's the people in Jordan who are like in charge of Jordan. So he was from that lineage of the Prophet. So they went to him and they said, listen, if you wage a war against the Turks, this is Great Britain. So then we'll make you in charge of what they're in charge of, which would mean that Saudi Arabia would have control of Turkey, all of Mesopotamia, through the Red Sea, which included Syria, Iraq, Jordan, Palestine, Egypt, all of northern Africa, Libya, Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco. I mean, all points going, in both directions, north, south, you name it. They would have been in control of all of that area. So the king, or we say Sharif Hussein, said, okay. But they still had to go to Abdulaziz ibn Saud, who was the head over all of the Arabian Peninsula in Riyadh. And they agreed for a small portion of money. So that happened. They revolted against their own Muslim brothers. They revolted against the Turks there. And when it came time to deliver, then the British, along with the French, they plotted and said, no, we're not going to give them all of what we said because we don't want them to have all of that control. And so thus, rather than giving them what they promised, they reneged and made them in charge of what we know today to be the Arabian Peninsula. I mean, they couldn't even deliver Qatar, Bahrain to them. They cut all of that up, and said, here, take this, be happy. When we talk about that, we see how the government's policy and the issue of economics, as well as religion, again, it desecrated a people, a race, and a community on a national level. And when we talk about, if we fast forward to our situation in East Orange, you didn't have anybody during the 90s more influential on the African American community from amongst the Muslims than Imam Abdullah Tawfiq Abu Muslima. And it's a known fact that when you talk about the different sects of Islam in general, most of those sects were, backed, made up, persuaded, trained, supported by government policy, government officials, as it relates to this country, the United States. And I remember on two notes. One, Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah, one of his old classical books, when he was talking about the early sects of the Muslims, such as the Khawarij and the Qadariyah and the Jahmiyyah and the Mu'tazila and all of these different groups, the Shia. He said all of the groups of Muslims back then, he said, were either founded, made up by either a Jew or a Christian. And I said, wow, when I read it in the book, I was blown away. Closed the book for a minute and sit back and think about that. And went back and read it again. And I remember in one of the classes in Yemen, one of the shuyukh, and one of the lessons we had, one of the teachers, he explained, and he showed how each one of those sects of Islam, how they broke up and made offshoots, how they would have similar beliefs from amongst the Jew or the Christians. And you will wonder why, because if the guy infiltrated as a Jew, then of course some of what he integrates into that sect of Muslims are going to be similar to the Jews. It makes sense, right? And likewise, the one who infiltrates from the Christian, some of what he injects to the Muslim is going to be part of what's from Christianity. And I thought, like, wow, and all the characters were named, who were the founders of, these different groups and movements. So if we fast forward, the same thing, and we talk about the Darul Islamic movement, the Jamaat al-Tabligh, we talk about the issue of, where we will understand Ikhwani Muslimun. We will talk about Al-Qaeda, which is Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden, Jamaat al-Tawheed, wa Jihad, what's this, Qazawi, those guys. We talk about Jamaat al-Takfir, You know, those people, all they're worrying about is deeming a Muslim to be a disbeliever, to spill blood and wage war. And when you talk about what we know today to be Salafiyah in the West, and this is why our brother, Mada Akhina Fillah, the White Battle, Abu Aliyah, he wrote the book, Quote Characteristics of the Salafis in the West. And this treatise that he wrote, it must have been about, I would say, almost 8-9 years ago when he started writing this. And it just came out maybe a good 4 years ago, almost 5 years now. And many of the shuyukh who heard about it, got it. It was translated to Arabic. They wanted to publish it because he went and showed from a secular perspective, a cult, and from an Islamic perspective, hizb, which they are the same, just two different languages, concepts are the same, how this is for the Salafis in the West. And so if we go back to the issue of desecration through economics, through what we said, religious sects, and as it relates to making disunity amongst the people and causing the people to elevate with their hatred and envy, then, during that time, we understand that Imam Abu Muslima, he was one of the graduates of the University of El-Medina. And I remember the brother was talking to me yesterday, Abu Ali. We were talking on the phone. He's living in Qatar. We were talking, and he said, I remember when we were sitting in the pizza place, me, you, he named some other brothers. He said, and way back then, we were debating this issue back in the mid 90s. He said, and you said, Abu Muslim is different from the rest of the people, the da'is, the du'ats, the preachers, the callers, the graduates, the imams. He's different, meaning from amongst our people, African American. He said, and I remember us asking you, how is he different? He said, and you said to us, Ukaashah, back then I was Saud, he said, you said to us, because he doesn't have anything that they could use against him. He's spick and span his character. He's a family man. Nobody could say anything bad about him, true or false, made up. He doesn't have any issue with women or, monies or integrity, while other people, either something was on them of shortcomings or people made something up against them. So this made him different, because when you talk about, the issue of desecration, then you have to tear down the role model, the one that, is a shining star. You have to pull him from the sky, you see. So what time is it?
It's only like 10 after, not even.
Okay, great. So the point, before I, get sidetracked, is that it was a movement in the direction of not only religion but economic, independence. As we mentioned time and time again how we went from a small storefront, or actually was a church, a small church, and it had like an upstairs, a downstairs, and then the basement, and we had a humble bookstore, and it wasn't very big at all. And we went from that to buying one of the biggest armories in the United States. And rather than saying the Islamic center of this city, or the masjid of this town, which was known to be called Islamic Center of East Orange, Masjid Rodatullah, we went from that to the Islamic Center of America. Can you imagine? Somebody say, wait a minute, who this nigga think he is? The Islamic Center of East Orange is one thing, but Islamic Center of America? That's a hell of a statement. And then he had, under that umbrella, Masjidu Ahlu Sunnati, the masjid of the people of the Sunnah. Madrasatu Ahlu Sunnati, the school of the people of the Sunnah, from kindergarten to 12th grade, and Maktabatu Ahlu Sunnati, and the bookstore of the people of the Sunnah. So you can imagine the type of influence. And I remember the first khutbah in that masjid, we had like no carpet. It was all like a shell, because the armory was like where if you open the garage doors, you're supposed to drive tanks, trucks, all of that in. So if you open those doors, it's just a big open garage. Then when you get to the doors of the building, that's what we converted into the school. So the masjid was really in a shell that was a brick garage. So imagine, there's no carpet, it's cold, and people bring their little musallas and little pieces of this and that. And he gave the first khutbah. He said, "Jihad, dawah of the first Muslims." Subhanallah. Now, mind you, this was before 9/11. Nobody came, locked him up. Nobody was afraid he used the title. And he talked about how the Muslims really, they spread Islam by way of good character. But when they had to fight, it was because of the people trying to annihilate them. And we know this is the origin of jihad. As they say, jihad has two meanings Islamically. Jihad difa, the jihad of defense. When somebody comes to fight you or kill you, you got to defend yourself. Every country believes in that. Every country has Department of Defense. Every country has internal affairs. Everybody understands that. And then you have jihad al-talab, when you decide, okay, we know it's some problem and y'all want to get us, we're going to pick and come to you first, so that you don't come in and annihilate our town, our village. We're going to pick a spot and we're going to go and fight. Everybody understands that. How many wars has our country made with other people? And all the soldiers end up saying, in the end, those who are alive, damn, what was we fighting for? This ain't our war. So we understand that. So he was making the point that Islam didn't spread by the sword, as they claim. It's spread by good character, trading, doing commerce with the people. But the fighting was part of the legislation when a person or a people was threatened and wanted to be annihilated. So they will fight, fair fight, not hurting the infrastructure, not killing the innocent, not attacking the preacher, the pope, the rabbi, not attacking the women, killing or raping them, not killing or attacking the children, not hurting the goats and the cattle, with all of the rules of Islam that really go with dignity and fighting the people who have a problem with you on the battlefield, as opposed to what we see today. So that was the first khutbah. And then I remember he gave another khutbah. He said, "We did not come to take your leadership." Subhanallah. Because people felt threatened. Why? Because again, the unity that we established under his leadership, and I'm talking about, it went from East Orange, New Jersey, outside of New Jersey, to New York, to Pennsylvania. It went across the water to Canada, to Great Britain. Why they can sometimes have capital. It hit Egypt, it hit Saudi Arabia, Kuwait. It wasn't a place in the world that didn't hear about what we were doing. And again, when you talk about economically, we put up the $235,000 ourselves. We didn't get no loan from no bank. We didn't go borrow no money from no organization. It didn't take us long. We started this mission in 1995. By 1997, we was closing the deal on the building, $335,000 deal. That came from the everyday working people, which we created an economic base for ourselves. Muslims, if they needed some work, like I could remember not being employed, but I was working with the Muslim, and the Muslim would pay you. Not give you a couple of dollars and something to eat and say Jazakallah khairan. No, he pay you $11, $15 an hour, cash, untaxable, under the table. And like the brother Abu Ali said, we were young. We were in our 20s. We were in our 20s, man. We were the pillars of the masjid. Myself, him, some of the other brothers, Jihad, Abdullah bin Vilburn, Ishaq, Bruce Begum. It was a group of us, man. Shadid Muhammad at that time, Abdullah Red, Abdullah, we call him Abdullah, Abdul Haq, from Washington, we was from Washington, D.C., Ismail from Washington, D.C., who married the Moroccan sister. I mean, we were young, man, and we were the people in the masjid. If you worked at night, you got off, went home, got some sleep, you was in the masjid during the daytime for Dhuhr, Asr. If not Dhuhr, definitely Asr, Maghrib, Isha. You were in the classes. We had security team. We had a security team of 400 people. And I remember, subhanAllah, it was called Swords of the Sunnah. If anybody had a problem, they would call us. I remember one time the brothers in Patterson, New Jersey, they had a problem with the dope dealers. One of the brothers said something to one of the brothers' wives, and then the brother went to deal with him, and they threatened to kill him. So they called us. I was one of the guys on the board and on security. So we got the call, and they described to us what the deal was. So we got the address, the area, and we went out and checked it out in the daytime. Then at nighttime after Isha, we went. We had like about, I remember 2-3 cars. I can't name no names because the brothers would be mad, but I remember we went, and I was with one brother. We had the walkie-talkies, and our job was, we was leaned back in the chairs like detectives, where if somebody walked past, they couldn't see you. Had our kufis off, and we had the walkie-talkie. And if they called our code, then we would go in the building shooting and kill the dope dealers. But the first people that went in was the diplomats to calm the situation, let them know, listen, they the Muslims, y'all can't be doing this, y'all really got to, all that dope y'all selling, y'all shouldn't be selling it, but if y'all gonna do that, y'all better not bother the Muslims with that, y'all better not take it to the masjid, you better not bother our sisters or else. And, this was the kind of power, this was the kind of influence, unity that we had. And again, nobody came and locked us up. Nobody came. We was training martial arts. Nobody came before 9/11. The same way when you talk about them training Osama bin Laden in Afghanistan, how could you lock up the terrorists and you aiding them and giving them money and training them in guerrilla warfare? It doesn't make sense, you see. But this, when you talk about the economic base, imagine we put up $235,000 cash in 2 years. That's a strong economic base. We had our own businesses, clothing, books, and it was duplicated all across the United States. And so now, when we talk about the issue of desecrating the people, it's known, just like the issue of the fall of the Ottoman Empire and how they got, unfortunately, the leader of Mecca at that time, Hussein, Sharif al-Hussein from the Prophet's family, who was in charge of Mecca, and then they had somebody who was in charge of Medina, but he wasn't from the Arabs. He was from the Turks. And then Abdulaziz bin Saud was the head over all of them in El-Riyadh. So the same way this was orchestrated. People wanted their own independence. People didn't want to be up under one leadership. And I remember even when you talk about Philadelphia, the brothers that were from the heads of the community during that time, Muhammad Amin, Sadiq Abdul Jabbar, those brothers, I remember, they had the building, but the Jamil Alameen and them ran the community. And they told them one time the Imam Abu Muslim, he went to do a class on the obligation of sticking together and the prohibition of dividing and disunity. And so that one class took place and they got the call. And the people from Jamil Alameen and them said, listen, we don't want that, kind of teaching in the masjid. We don't want them Salafi books and them Salafi boys teaching, So it was a physical threat, like, warfare, So if he come back again, there's going to be some stuff, some bloodshed. And so I remember the next week, that class that wasn't supposed to be, that class was held. And the masjid was packed. I remember I was sick. I didn't go. And it was at least 80 brothers in the masjid. Everybody had burners. If you'd have lit a match in the masjid, it probably exploded. And it was like, no, this is our masjid. We paid for it. How you going to tell us what we can't do? And then we got the call over the weekend from the head office of Jamil Alameen, said, we don't want no problem. Go ahead. We turn the building over to y'all, and that was it. Although the Muslims brought it with the money, you see the leadership that was, controlling them. You can see what I'm saying? So when you talk about that type of influence, they had to dismantle that type of leadership, that community, because this was the first time that African Americans, especially Muslims, had gathered on a large scale like that in a long time. And we weren't isolated, for example, from the community. We dealt with the Christians, we dealt with the Jews, we dealt with the people that was Sufi, the Kwanis. I mean, we had a relationship with everybody. And I remember we had programs, the non-Muslims would come, some of our relatives, we had a situation where one of the brothers, he told me, he said, really, if Abu Muslima wanted to become the mayor, they probably would have let him become the mayor during that time. That's how much power we had. Mm-hmm. You're talking about prostitution and drugs, all that was cleaned up. People moving around the masajid. In every city, this was duplicated. People were dressing, with Islamic attire, so to speak. People were, trying to, shake drugs and, fornication, adultery. You see people paying attention to how much money they didn't spend, on good things and how much money they spend on bad things. You really seen the change in the society. So now when you talk about the issue of tearing that down, then they got some people from the inside. And, of course, they got people from overseas where the issue went from Allah said in the Quran, his messenger said in the hadith to the Shaikh said. The Shaikh said. And this was the primary basis for, everything we did. Do you have evidence? This was the primary basis for everything we did. What did Allah say about that? It was call Allah, call Rasulullah. You couldn't do anything except somebody would ask you, Ain the dalil, what's your evidence? If you didn't have no ayah, you didn't have no hadith, you wasn't rocking with that. You weren't going nowhere. And you couldn't tell somebody you should follow this, you should do that. Oh, no. No way, But they replaced that with, the Shaikh, he said, the Shaikh, he said, the Shaikh, he said. And then the whole issue of what books you can sell, what books you can't sell, what books you should read, what books you shouldn't read. All of that took away the economic base. Yeah, and that was part of who you could take from because, once they laid that foundation, then you dismantle the bookstore, the wholesale distributor, who you're buying from. Yeah, and it just sucked the economic base out of the community. the schools, the restaurants. I remember even there was talk about a Muslim credit union. This, establishing a Muslim bank. I remember that. All of this. But one of the ways they were able to dismantle that was the dissension, which we said in the name, which we call boycotting. That person did something, it was so abhorred that you had to, shun him or disdain that person. And we understand that is something in the religion. But also in the religion, when you're the minority and a non-Muslim majority, then its primary rule, its consensus from the Quran, Sunnah, and from the companions, that you don't boycott somebody when you are weak and you're the minorities and a non-Muslim majority. Because the primary goal is to stay united, not disunited. The primary goal is to stay a franchise, not disenfranchised. The primary goal is to be a solid structure. And if you ostracize, alienate, or boycott somebody in this type of environment, then normally what happens is they become like the lone sheep. They just drift away. They are already struggling. They already have a issue with identity crisis and racism and all of these things, economic struggles. So now you have this base that's built that people are finally, giving some hope in this regard, and then someone comes and pull that rug from under their feet in the name of boycott. Yeah, it destroyed a lot of things. And so now, if you fast forward, what we understand to be what's called the Sunni or the Salafi community is much different now than back then. Even when you talk about the primary, what is your code of ethics for doing something, that you very seldom you hear the proof for this is Allah said, the proof for this is the messenger said. Most often you hear the Shaikh he said, or this scholar he said. And we know that the first line of evidence, al-masadir al-ula, al-Quran. Quran is the base for everything. For your aqidah, your creed, for your iman, your faith, for your ibadah, your worship, for your psychology, for your language, for your social reform, for family life, for business transactions, for contracts, everything. Quran is the first line of dealing. Then you have the authentic sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, authentic sunnah of the Prophet. And then you have what some people said, ijma', consensus really means consensus of the companions, because that's recorded. That's for consensus of all of the Muslims. Many say that's impossible, because how can you get the recordings of all of the Muslims in the world? It's like almost impossible. Those who lived, those who died, those who you didn't know about, those who their writings weren't preserved. So most of the time when they say ijma', they mean ijma', the consensus of the companions that's recorded. And we know this is the three things that nobody can reject. But unfortunately, in this day and time, it became other than that. Then when you talk about economics, subhanAllah, it ruined the economic base. Now people are scared to give. From our community, again, we're not talking about from, and this is just in perspective, because we're talking about African American oppression and how this works, even from a economic standpoint, from a religious standpoint, from a social standpoint. We had enough trust to spend and give and circulate our own money in the 90s. People were buying houses, fixing them up, selling them to the Muslim, business was being conducted. We had learned that thing that Elijah Muhammad and them taught back in the early 1900s in their movement, economic stability, your own economic base. And I remember Dr. Claude Anderson, he said, if you don't have, any economics, your vote ain't worth a damn in this country. Yeah. And remember, he's somebody that he knows he was, dealing with the candidates, and I mean he was a manager, so his hands was in there, and he got stuff done. But you're talking about a man that has 6 degrees. Somebody with 6 college degrees, he should achieve something. But guess what? Like he said, he could only go so far himself as a black man. And that if you don't have an economic basis of people, you're not going nowhere. This is one of the silent weapons they use against you, your economic base. You see. So when you talk about, how that thing was instrumentally done, and we understand because, the whole thing was, again, to discredit, if people couldn't find nothing on you, they would make something up on you. Why? Because they don't want people following, strong leadership and people who, they're not going to, deceive and water down the religion. They want people that could be sold out, people that could be pawns in the games, people that would be, hypocritical. And you didn't find that with us back in the 90s. You really didn't, you see. So, in conclusion, when you talk about desecration of a people, a race and their community through economics, through that which is instability, making people disunited, making the people have hatred and enmity towards one another, then this is the thing that would destroy any community. And once the damage is done, very seldom do you see, that being repaired, because the damage is too deep from all levels. Once you take the hope of a people away, it's hard to motivate them to any type of hope again. And this is what took place, and we'll say that, yeah, while people could say, well, he had this, Abu Muslima, he did that, or he was, as the people say, he was a Hizbi, he was a partisan. I mean, but we're in America. We grew up saying, I got the Knicks, who you got? I got the Sixers. This is a partisan country. You understand me?
Alert. Low battery.
That's how we grew up, and that's part of the fabric of, what this country
Close. Button.
made upon, So things could have been
Close. Button.
double click. Yeah. Things could have been handled differently when you look back, because when you talk about those same excuses or reasons to dismantle our community and our progress and our leadership, you have this in every other community and places around the world. It wasn't dismantled. It wasn't touched. It wasn't bothered. You see what I'm saying? The focus was on our community. And this is one of the issues of oppression that people don't want to admit, people don't want to realize, and while, now it's just, are you on the truth or not, it's like a sense of false Islamic pride. You know what I'm saying? That, it splintered and divided us. And to the point that now, even when you talk about your own relatives, if they're not Muslim, then, you outcast them or you isolate. How can you isolate from your own mother, your own aunt, your own uncle, because he's not a Muslim? And we remember the church wasn't like that either. The church had a lot of political gains and were very strong because they included their people, you see. And this was the same thing we seen, in the 90s. We included our people, We understood the bigger picture without compromise and selling out. But this was one of the tools they used to desecrate, a community, a people, and erase this type of economic divide, religious sectarianship, and the false religious pride in the name of who's more spiritual, who's more righteous and who's not. And we'll end with this point. Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, wallahi, some narrations like in Surah Al-Hujurat when Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala mentioned Ya ayyuhan nas, O you people, inna khalaqnakum min dhakrin wa untha, indeed we create you from male and female, وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَارُفُوا, and we made you nations and tribes so you would know one another, get to know one another. Then Allah said, Inna akramakum, verily the most noble of you, and Allahi attaqakum, and the sight of Allah is those who are most pious. And then Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala mentioned, Inna Allah huwa alim al-khabir, Allah is all aware and He's the most knowledgeable of that, because that's the thing of the heart. And so look, even Allah in that ayat, He didn't start with the religion first. He started with the human being as a people in a community. And oftentimes now we hear people say, well, you're Muslim first, or how could you deal with that? You're nationalistic, you're dealing with nationalism, akhi. But Allah started with the issue of who we are first, before the issue of religion. Because you can fake who you are religiously. That's why you have the issue of believers, you have the issue of non-believers and hypocrites. But you can't fake being black. You can't fake being minority. You can't fake being downtrodden. You can't fake being someone who systematically all the odds are against you. That's a reality. And this in itself is one of the biggest things that Islam is against. This type of oppression, this type of keeping the people down. And this is why this topic is important for us to go back and revisit as a Muslim, the desecration of a people, a race and a community by way through economic control, that which is religious, sectarian divide, making the people disconnected, isolated, and sowing the seeds of hatred and enmity. Nas'Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala Yahfu anna kathir. We ask Allah to pardon us for much of what we do. Wa nas'Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala and yubatilu al-batilin, to nullify and make that which is falsehood uncredible in the land. Wa nas'Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and yahiq al-haq. And we ask Allah to make the truth a reality. Innahu sami'a du'a, innahu ala kulli shay'in qadir. Sallallahu wa sallam wa barak ala abdillahi wa rasulih wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in.
Finish button.